coming into Auschwitz, the reaction was, oh, there are human beings here, so they're not killing everybody who just arrived. But at the same time, of course, everybody was terribly scared. But we still, the notion of hope was so strong that you always felt, well, it can't be that bad. There are human beings still walking around and everything else. And then you noticed that it was pretty bad.
And then you were transported from Auschwitz in a long death march, which also seems unsurvivable, but you did survive because you just felt, you described that you didn't want them to win.
Yeah, that was something from my father, in a sense. My father always said, if we let them, they're going to kill us, and then they will win. So we cannot let them win. We have to live, we have to do everything to keep ourselves alive. Because the temptation on this death march, which became known as the death march, was that it was 3 days of walking in January of 1945 in Poland in that terrible cold. Anybody who sat down would be immediately shot and the body thrown into the ditches. So just the temptation to sit down, a lot of people just simply gave up. And what drove me was, no, they were going to win, and I'm not going to let them. Again, a child's thinking, because after the 3 days march, we were moved into trains, the trains that took us to Sachsenhausen. And of course, every train was open, again in January 45, open railroad cars. On each one, we had an SS guard. When we arrived, there was a stop in Berlin at some station. And there are two things that happened there that are still in my mind that will never leave me. One was a woman, a civilian, a woman in Berlin walked by and said, stinkt schon wieder von Juden. And it stinks of Jews. And then about 10 or 15 minutes later, our SS guard gets off the train and goes into a restaurant or whatever, comes out with a steaming cup of coffee. I hadn't had anything warm for about 9 days. And he saw me looking at it. He gave me the cup of coffee. Now, how do you square these two things that happen in the same country with the same people? I think that is part of the mystery of this terrible history. That there were a number of occasions in El Salvador and some other places where my concentration experience would come back. For example, there was a terrible massacre in El Mozote in Salvador. And we came in and it was described to us. And we had one witness, the only person who had survived, a woman. And she started to speak, and I could have finished her story. Which always struck me, that man's cruelty to man is not very original. It's always the same. On the one hand, we think we're making a great deal of progress, and on the other hand, we're still doing the same thing. I knew what it was like to be a victim. So it's important that human rights lawyers and judges know what it is like to be a victim. And in the early days, now there are lots of human rights organizations, all of the things. When I first started, there was hardly anything happening in that field.
So there is some real progress.
Tremendous progress. But contrary to what we heard yesterday, I think the cruelty still continues. We had those my colleagues here, we heard certain very optimistic thoughts on the subject. It still happens, unfortunately.